the last video we were able to get all users. So now we're going to get a user by ID, given ID. So let's see how to do that. So we'll go back to the user .py, and this was the first one we did, getting all the users. So now this is the next one we're doing, how to get the user by ID. And this time we're using a class method. Why? Because we'll make reference to the user ID. So what we need to do is, first we need to create our connection as usual. Then next we are going to set the user ID to become this ID. So remember, we have this class method here, set user, to take in the value of this, any of these values given, or all of the values, and is going to automatically set that to this here, the user class attributes here. So in this case, it's going to take in the ID, we'll feed it here. It will set the ID to class, that's cls.id, and it's going to change this none to the ID, so that we can always call this and use it anywhere and anytime we want. So that's what it did here. So it's taking this ID, we are feeding it this get method, and is going to store it using this set user ID. So you can see the key value relationship here. So it's going to store that in as ID up here. So that's just what it's doing here. So it will set that. So once it has set that, it's now going to use context manager to now create our cursor from the connection. So conduct cursor, this, and as score. So now it's going to now set the query. And what's the query? It says select all these asterisks from users, that's the users table, where the ID is equals to this. Now this is a way to prevent SQL injection. So that's why we deployed this, and you'll see how we'll call it. So it says order by ID ascending. So that's just what that means. So now we need to now do this. That's, we're creating a variable called value, and this first, let me say, the only reference we're creating here is going to be that class ID which we set. So that's why it's calling that ID which we set from the beginning here. So it's now calling it in here, and we have to put this comma. This is just the format, even if you're putting one value. So when you are running your execute method, you will now put the query in there, and the query will now be asking, oh, so where is this now? You're trying to avoid SQL injection, right? So where is this value? And that's the value you now add here as the second argument for your execute statement. So once it takes that, you now want to view because you're getting by ID, so you want to view the records that fulfill this SQL query. So you have to run this method. We had to run this method fetch all to the cursor, and it's storing in a variable fetch, and we're just doing the same thing, running a for loop and saying for each of the records that is going to come in as a list of values, and in fetch, which is this from fetch all. Now I want you to put it in this format when you're printing it out. So that's ID, the same thing, get the ID of that person, of in this case of the user, the username, first name, last name, created that and updated that. That's what it will do, and you have to commit the connection. Then you print out this variable containing all the records it's going to fetch and return true. Then print out exception if there's any, and close the connection. So this script is now what should be able to print out the records based on the ID. So let's try and run that and see. So it's the same thing. Remember, we have models package user, models user, and inside that we're expecting a class user here, this class here, and we're also expecting to run this method get, and that's why we did that get. And this get is expecting an ID here, and the ID in this case we want to get 2. So if you check the let's check the PG admin table, and let's see the user in 2, and that's this person Bob scale. So we expect it to give us that. So let's run that. And now we can see that it gave us the ID 2, username B scale, then first name Bob scale. So it showed that it was able to retrieve that to us. So that's simply how to using this, how to fetch record for an ID that's been given.